So I'm going to reduce everybody so it's only me that's showing. And I'm going to take you through a couple slides just as a sort of foundation for all of us. And we've already done this one, we're talking about it. So, and you all know the schedule. I want to point out one thing in the middle. Cynthia Hovind is going to join us to do eurythmy that evening with all of us. You don't have to get up, but I highly urge you to do so. You know, this on the 14th. And then the 25th is too close to Thanksgiving. So we'll go all the way out to December 9th for our last one, because December 2nd is the book club that some of you have. And this will be perfect for a kind of pre-Christmas session. And I also want to point out that there's just way too much material here to cover. And I've tried to shrink it as much as possible, but it's really just not possible to get it that shrunk. So we'll have to do as best we can. And I do want to have time each week for all of us to discuss things. So I will probably lead off with maybe 20 minutes of something of material that then we can discuss. Some of the key points that I want you to get from tonight is what were the ancient mysteries and what role did they play in the spread of Christianity? Why did Roman Christianity seek to free itself from this past? And how have the mysteries continued? And how anthroposophy is its latest flowering. So we'll jump right into session one, and I want to read to you a quote. You can see on the bottom Steiner's quote, and above this is what you'll find in most of the books. That which is known as the Christian religion existed among the ancients and never did not exist from the beginning of the human race until Christ came in the flesh, at which time the true religion, which already existed, began to be called Christian. This is St. Augustine, who says this in the 4th century. And it's very interesting when we look into St. Augustine, which we will do in 2 sessions hence. So what about this human race from the beginning? And we heard earlier that in the beginning, the Logos was. What is the relationship of this Logos to the human race? When did this human race begin? What is the human being? Do we have a earthly and a cosmic origin? If so, how are these two related? And to answer that, by the way, if everybody could go on mute, that would be helpful. I'm going to mention a legend of light and dark that Mani taught to his disciples. And it's very short. In this one, in the beginning, there were these 2 kingdoms of light and dark. And could you all go on mute, please? The kingdom of dark decided that they wanted to overcome the kingdom of light. And so they attacked this kingdom. Sorry, just a minute. Okay. And when they attacked, nothing would come of this attack. And so it fell upon the kingdom of light to decide what to do about this. And being a kingdom full of only goodness, they came to the conclusion that what they should do is to mix some of their own into the kingdom of darkness. And this was the archetype of the human being, which is a being. And by mixing this into the kingdom of darkness, the mixture became a vortex, and into that vortex, death fell. This is a wonderful story as a complement to the story in Genesis on the origin of the human race and how it becomes a mixture of light and dark. But we also have from Genesis the story of Eden, and this led to the fall of mankind. In that story, one of the higher beings, named Lucifer, is present in this Garden of Eden and successfully tempts Eve into desiring to eat of the fruit of light, of goodness and evil.
Knowledge of goodness, good and evil.
Sorry. Sorry, just a minute, everyone, but this person came back and I need to stop anybody from attending now. I don't see how I can do that. Participants.
How would you know?
Andrew,
Yes,
Say this is
I got it.
this is Stacy. Oh, you got it? Okay.
I got it. I've locked the meeting. There were some other people that wanted to join, but I better lock the meeting. I don't know who that person was, and they didn't identify themselves, so I'm sorry about that, everyone. So in this story of Eden, we now have this situation where this successful temptation by Lucifer changes the course of the divine plan. And that change in plan required humanity to enter a state of isolation from the spiritual world. And to do that, we had to be coupled with other beings that were not part of the divine plan. So we'll talk about that in just a minute, but this was bringing in Ahriman into this whole story. So our past looks like this. We existed back on the first planetary condition called Old Saturn in esoteric terms. And at that point, there would be just warmth. The warmth has become the physical of today by progressing through these other planetary conditions. But at that time, it was only a warmth condition. When we move on to Old Sun, adding to what has become the physical is what will become the etheric. So that was built on Old Sun for humanity. When we arrive at old moon, we are given our astral body. And finally, here on Earth, we receive our ego. It's very interesting. There is a branch of astrophysics called metallicity that also considers that for Earth to have heavy metals, there must have been 3 different prior solar systems. So what Steiner brought up, which was unique at the time, has since been, you might say, proven, although that's a little bit too strong a word, but something very similar is being entertained. This you can find much more in occult science, of course, but after this stage, humanity will become the 10th hierarchy, and we begin to co-create with the gods that have been active up until this time. But have the gods continued to be active in our time? And the answer is no, and we will see that in this diagram. When we look back at the different epochs of Earth evolution, and we can't really put time frames to these because the whole sense of time has changed. We can't even speak of a day being the same back here in the Polarian time. This would have been a recapitulation of old Saturn, of the warmth stage when Earth began. And then we would have recapitulated the ancient sun in the Hyperborean, and then recapitulated old moon in the Lemurian. Now, it's also very important to know that between this old sun and old moon phase, as we go from this planetary condition to the old moon, the Godhead directed beings at the level of dynamis, the spirits of mites, to volunteer, so to speak, some of them to become spirits of hindrances. So we had no hindrances here. On old moon, we would begin hindrances or resistances. And that continues into the Earth phase, in which those hindrances are even stronger and become forces of evil. Those would not have existed before. So when we talk about laggard beings, beings that didn't finish their development on these earlier stages, we cannot speak of them as being evil beings. So it would be something different in that sense. Now, the other thing that's important here is that in each of these periods, what is brought spiritually into human life in earthly life, has to be completed. And you can see when it gets completed here. So in our epoch, we have to finish off what occurred in the Lemurian epoch. The Atlantean was the first that did not have a recapitulation of planetary conditions. And so the Earth would have been in a stage of growth until here, and then in a stage of decay following that. So we are already in a process of decay. And Steiner points this out, that we would not have had radioactive, which is the decay of matter, before the middle of Atlantean times. And only after that do we start getting decay of matter. And really the solidification doesn't occur until the middle of the Atlantean period. So when you're looking at granite and so on, you're looking at what was once living substance that had a kind of consistency like pulp. We'll talk about why all of that matters. Then when we go into our 5th fifth epic, we have a recapitulation then of old Saturn, old sun, old moon. We have a recapitulation of Polaris, and then Hyperborea, Lemuria, and Atlantean. And now we're the first to have no recapitulation of any of the earthly epics. But again, the Egyptian Chaldean period is now completing itself in our Post-Atlantean cultural age. That's what PACA stands for, Post-Atlantean cultural age. And this whole thing is the Post-Atlantean epic. Again, you have a kind of growth leading up to the Greek-Roman period of the human being. And now the human being is in decay. So before we saw the earth in its growth phase, and then the earth going into decay. Now we see the human being reaching its peak in the Greek-Roman period. A couple of the other important points here is that there is a change in the cosmos that Earth is part of at some point, which would have been during the Hyperborean epic. The sun leaves. Before that, we would have been in a condition similar to what scientists call the great nebulas, a condition of just warmth. And then the sun leaves. Some people might interpret that as a bunch of very selfish beings deciding that they don't want to hang out with us anymore. And of course, that's not exactly how it is. These beings not only needed different conditions for their development, but it was important for our development also that they leave. But there's also the question about what Lucifer did, in a sense, in also causing the sun to leave these conditions on the earth after humanity took on this capability of understanding good and evil. And then we enter the Lemurian period, in which humans had to begin to take on physical substance. And this was very difficult and proceeded way too quickly for a human life to have any purpose and development. And so Yahweh took the moon away, slowing down the evolutionary process and taking with it the hardening forces with the moon. And of course, as we know from these other slides, this will come to a completion in the future, before our fifth Post-Atlantean epic comes to an end. What were we in those olden days? Well, we were androgynous beings. Our offspring were clones of the parents. This picture shows Adam and Eve as male and female. At that time, they were not. They were both. And this offspring would feel itself as if it were the parent. It was a clone. It had the same blood. In that bloodline, it not only identified itself with the ancestor, the family, the group, but that bloodline actually gave it memories of its ancestor. And so when it says that the years of Adam were 900 years and so forth, it's that this memory, this identification of its clones lasted for 900 years. And so we can say the divine plan showed us having a path like this. But after and because of the fall, our path became something that looks more like this, where we actually have to enter now into the sub-physical. And we are already doing that today. There's some wonderful books I'm mentioning here, but I read a quote that comes from this world of the senses, world of the spirit. So you see, man is really a being who has undergone a great coarsening in his nature. For were he as he was originally intended in the purposes of the gods, he would have no bones. Rather, his form would consist in supersensible imagined bones. He would have no muscles to serve as an apparatus for movement, but he would have had supersensible substance moving within him. So you can see it's been quite a difference. And I'm going to show another diagram. If it was up to Lucifer, we would have all remained up there in the land of Eden. Yahweh had intended us to come down just barely to the surface of the earth. And because of the fall, we had to bring Ahriman into this picture. And so we have progressed, and we will have progressed before we are able to leave Ahriman for 26,000 years. And that is so that we could develop our selfhood. And for that, we needed to exist in the kingdom of matter, where everything has separation. In the spiritual world, there is no such separation. So a couple review things. In Lemuria, the moon separated. In Atlantis, we finally, in the middle of Atlantis, had our first sexual procreation. And now in our post-Atlantean, something Steiner talks about in the evolution of human freedom and personal consciousness is that we are getting younger, but younger in this way, that back in the ancient Indian culture, a human being progressed with their body and soul together until they reached about the age of 56. So the elders were considered wise. And you can see that in each one of these epochs, it's dropped by about 7 years. And in the future, puberty will no longer exist because the body and soul development will not have this point of continuing into puberty. They will have separated already. Now, in this transition period from Eden to Earth, we have to talk about Cain and Abel as the representative beings of that period. It's true that Eve and Adam continue, but the representatives of this period are Cain and Abel, and they are androgynous at first. They also will end up male and female as they enter into the Atlantean times. And it is through them that evil, in a sense, came into the Atlantean times when the able men took wives from the Cain women. And this resulted in the giants known as the Nephilim, the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. And this led to all sorts of abominations in the physical bodies that were not yet like our bodies. These were much more malleable bodies at that time. So Lucifer, in his temptation, wanted us to join a level of godliness much more quickly. And he still does. He is trying desperately to speed things up and to get us out of there. When we talk about wisdom and knowledge, he glows because he brings the glories of old moon with him and would love to take us back to old moon. So Lucifer provided this wisdom of the past and also the remembrance of one's ancestors working in our bloodline. He also brings a focus on the astral and the astral's imprint onto the etheric. But when we talk about initiation, what he brought required the necessity to be able to separate a neophyte from their physical body. And so, and this all comes because of the fall and this linking up with the physical body. The physical body's effect upon the etheric body prevented the astral body from imprinting organs upon the etheric, for opening up the chakras, so to speak. And of course, when one was separated from the physical body in an act or rites of initiation, there would be a maximum time, or else the person actually would die. And that maximum time was 3.5 days. And we can find references to that 3.5 days throughout the New Testament and in the Bible itself, such as Jonah in the whale. Now, what was necessary during early human evolution is that we were guided, that we had teachers. And this involved the hierarchy that is closest to us. The archi were involved back in ancient India, and the archangeloi in ancient Persia, and the angels even into Egypt and Chaldean periods. By the time we get to Greece and Rome, this guidance from these entering into human bodies, sort of overshadowing the being in those bodies, had to stop. And at most, since that time, a spiritual being can help only in terms of giving us ideas, of writing, in helping us write things, so to speak, overshadowing us in what we write. What has happened since 747 BC onwards is the development of the individual. And to help bring that about is the development of intelligence. And this is all to aid our ego development, our I am. But it also meant egoism arising. And with that came corruption even of what was sacred. And so from 747 on, what was known as the ancient mysteries began to fade as a response to this development of individual intelligence. When a person could go from saying, it thinks in me, to saying, I think. And all of this is for the development of freedom. The spiritual world had to step back. And what were once known as laws in the spiritual world became laws of nature. And we'll find out more about laws as they apply even in jurisprudence. And, and so the concept of the citizen came about, the science of law. And here we already see the hand of Ahriman working. And Ahriman thought in Roman times, aha, I am going to be successful. I am winning here. And then the Luciferic love of the law, the warmth from that entered in. And so the laws lost their coldness and became something that the Romans actually loved. And that ruined the plan for Ahriman. I need to talk a little about the moon extrusion. This densification took place because the moon separation and the incorporation of the mineral kingdom was to occur. The human being became a personality and thus accessible to freedom. It was a spiritual deed, thus it has a beginning and an end. So Steiner points to the year 8000 AD as when the moon will return. So the moon being, Jehovah, was honored as a moon divinity. It was clearly seen that cosmologically, behind all the processes of birth throughout all the kingdoms, there ruled the laws of the moon. And so one could, I might say, symbolically utter a deep secret of cosmology by saying, when the moonlight falls on the earth, on what is represented through this light, depends everything connected with all the sprouting, growing, and being born on the earth. In those pre-Christian ages, one did not turn to the highest mysteries, to the life of the sun. One turned to the reflected sunlight, that is, to the moon, whenever the secret of birth was alluded to. And the peculiar nuances which were poured over the depths of these pre-Christian conceptions depended on the fact that the initiates knew the mysteries of the moon. And so I asked the question there, what religions use the symbol of the moon? And I think you all know those. They regarded the sun mysteries, this is the initiates, as something quite veiled, something hardly bearable for humanity not fully prepared, because they knew that it is a deception, a maya, to believe that through the rays of the sun falling on the earth, those things which sprout and grow are enchanted out of the various kingdoms of nature. That is a deception of Maya. It was known that the life of the sun did not depend the birth of the process of birth, but on the contrary, the decaying, decreasing life, the process of death. These were the secrets of the mysteries. The moon causes things to be born, but the sun causes them to die. And however highly, for other reasons, the sunlight was honored in those pre-Christian mysteries, the sunlight was honored as the cause of death. The fact that beings had to die was not to be ascribed to old sun, but to the present sun, which appears so magnificently on the horizon. And I point out that human gestation is equal to 10 moons, or 280 days, and we are the 10th hierarchy. Just a little bit more on this passage because it's telling us about the ancient mysteries. Well, the decay of life, the opposite of birth, is connected with the sun life. But my dear friends, there was something else not so important in that pre-Christian age, but very specially important in our post-Christian age, and that is that all conscious life is connected with sun life, and that conscious life, through which man has especially to pass in the course of his earthly evolution, that consciousness which shines forth especially in this, the fifth post-Atlantean cultural age to which we ourselves belong, that is most intensely connected with the sun life. Only we must consider the sun life spiritually, as we have attempted to do in the course of lectures given this summer. For if indeed the sun is the creator of death, of the decaying life in the cosmos and also of man, yet the sun is at the same time the creator of conscious life. The conscious life was not so important in pre-Christian ages because it was then replaced by an atavistic clairvoyant life, which remained as an inheritance of the moon. For our post-Christian age, it has, however, become important, far more important than life. Consciousness has become more important than life because only through consciousness can the goal of earthly evolution be reached, which is that this consciousness should be attained in the corresponding way by the humanity on earth. You must receive this consciousness from the giver, the Son, from which comes the living into death and not the life of birth. Therefore, the mystery of Golgotha appears as that power in earthly development which has now become the most important thing for this evolution. The Son of the Son, the Christ who passed through the body of Jesus of Nazareth, that is connected with the deepest cosmic secrets. The ancient mystery initiates said to their pupils, try to recognize through your sleep life how the moon forces are playing into it. We know that even waking man is partially asleep. Try to recognize the moon life in your sleep life, for it plays into your sleep life as the silvery moonshine plays into the darkness of night. The Christian initiates, on the contrary, said to their disciples, try to recognize that in your waking life consciousness, as consciousness shines. For the sun forces pour into your waking life, just as from the morning till evening, the sun shines outside the life of the earth. You see, this reversal was fulfilled through the mystery of Golgotha. And whereas in the pre-Christian ages, the most important thing was to recognize the origin of life, it has now become the most important thing to recognize the origin of consciousness. So I think, I'll go on for just a couple minutes more. I've drawn a timeline, and you can look at this. I put all the slides up on the christianmysteries.com, but this we will be covering in here. So tonight we're just looking at the ancient mysteries and this period from 747 BC up till about Aristotle. Some of you know about Gurdjieff, and he claims that mystery schools went back at least 30,000 to 40,000 years, which would put him back in Atlantean times. Rudolf Steiner also points to the Atlantean period, but back then he calls them oracles. And there were 7 oracles of Atlantis in addition to the Vulcan oracle, which was betrayed. We can talk about that later because it plays a very important role in our times today. In Lemuria, all humans were clairvoyant. The need only arose after the moon left. And so some legends trace the origin of their mysteries back to Abel or back to Cain. In the Post-Atlantean period, the ancient mysteries can be pointed to in India. They would have talked about a oneness. And through their ancient mysteries, they would have been able to take or the initiate would have been able to go back into the period of Polaris. In ancient Persia, it would have been a duality, and they would have looked back to Hyperborea. In Egypt and Chaldea, now the concept of Trinity came into being, and their initiates saw back into Lemurian times. In the Greek mysteries, it became the human being that was important. And they saw back into the Atlantean times. I mentioned Cain and Abel. Abel, and then followed by Seth, was a shepherd. They become the priests. And They took whatever God gave to them and asked for nothing more. They were in a mood of reception. Whereas Cain was a tiller of the ground. Through Cain comes the arts and sciences, technology, and earthly wisdom. And it's Cain's intention to spiritualize the earth. Both of these are important in the human being. But can you feel how there has been a shift in human evolution from a dominance of Abel to today a dominance of Cain? When Solomon's temple was built around the year 1000 BC, and it lasted for a good 400 years or so, the priests were the rulers. The kings of Israel, Saul was the first king just before Solomon. Then there was King David, and then his son Solomon. And when Solomon's temple was being built, King Solomon, as an Abel, calls upon Cain, who is Hiram Abiff, to help build this temple. And this story, which I can't tell you all tonight, is important because as a representative of the soul, the Queen of Sheba comes and she falls in love and marries King Solomon. But then she meets Hiram Abiff, and huge passions develop in her for Hiram. And finally, a night when Solomon is drunk, she slips off her wedding ring and goes and spends the night with Hiram Abiff. And the next day, Hiram Abiff is killed by 3 of his journeymen and or apprentices. And so there's the question of who is Hiram's offspring, because Hiram is able to, during the fire that occurred in the casting of the molten sea, is able to jump into the fire and is taken by Tubal-Cain to meet Cain in the fires of the center of the earth. And he is told that he will have an offspring. And as he's dying, he's wondering who will be his offspring. I point out the possibility that his offspring was Rehoboam, who becomes king after Solomon due to this secret encounter with the Queen of Sheba, the wife of Solomon. It's also important during the time when the Jewish tribes were in Babylon that Daniel, who was there, is asked to interpret King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And the astrologers who were asked first answered the king, "There is no one on earth who can do what the king asked, to interpret his dream." And we heard about the importance of dreams and this sleep life connected with the moon. No king can do what the king asks. Sorry, no king, however great or mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. So that in itself is interesting. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. And so what does this tell us about Daniel and how he can work? So we saw earlier something about the Indian mysteries that go back to this oneness, to Brahman, then the mysteries of Persia, which bring in the duality and bring in later, after Zarathustra, Zoroaster and Mithra. In the Egyptian mysteries, we have the legends of Osiris, Isis, and Horus as the Trinity. We also have Hermes Trismegistus and the Emerald Tablet. We have the Babylonian mysteries of this time. We have other mysteries arising during this Egyptian period in the Near East of Hanmi and Tao. And then we come to the Greek mysteries, the Eleusinian, Delphic, Orphic, Dionysian, Samothracian, and many others. So these existed all over the world. And I've been to Mesa Verde several times. In Mesa Verde, there are special initiation rooms there. And we find in Peru some very unusual things. This is actually a hill of sand that has become petrified. And so often these mystery centers were in desolate places, in deserts and so on. So what were they? The mystery centers, as I said, existed in all societies. They were an oral tradition. In fact, writing any of this down would have been considered a sacrilege because writing was considered something from evil. Books were considered something from evil. So they offered a secret wisdom that existed side by side with their local religions. And through them, it shed light on the highest questions of the contemporary times. So they were guiding each of the peoples. And whoever came in touch with the mysteries spoke with the greatest reverence about them. So what did they reveal? Those initiated are in a position of a man who can see and who imparts his visual impressions to one born blind. So the vast majority of the people could not see anymore into the spiritual world. Their clairvoyance was gradually ending because it was the intention of the gods for us to fully enter the physical world. And as we saw, even into the sub-physical. The spiritual eye also sees what the material eye sees, but it can see it with a higher consciousness. And one who was so initiated could journey back to when one could address a god, and therefore bring something from that God into their current times to help them. But the mysteries were also seen as something very dangerous. If you were not properly prepared, if you had not gone through a purification of your astral body or of your soul, if you didn't have the moral stature, then it would be something of great danger. It would ruin a person. The other side of this is that there was no greater crime than to betray to the uninitiated any of the secrets, anything that you learned in these mysteries. But things were revealed when their time had come, and these would be done in terms of mythology, in ways that the people could understand as stories. So all these ancient schools of learning knew of each other, and they had some connections. It wasn't until the Greek times that these schools could no longer see and experience each other and then became separated. So you know maybe of the concept of the reverse ritual of prayer, the purpose of prayer and meditation and so on, that there's two aspects to these mystery centers. One is that the humans could go into the spiritual world, and this would be very true of the earlier mysteries. But when we moved along with materialism, especially into Greek times, then there was the attempt to try to bring the gods into the temple. And of course, there is the temple of the human body, which is where the God is to be found today. So in those ancient mysteries, they regarded a human being as coming from extraplanetary spheres into the planetary and finally to the earthly. and thus we were a microcosm of the macrocosm, consisting of body, soul, and spirit, of soma, psyche, and pneuma, as the Greek words would be. They also saw the role of the inner planets for our astral body and the outer planets for our etheric body, and that these impressed themselves upon each other, but that as we entered more deeply into the physical, the etheric body entered fully into the physical body, and thus the influence of the astral upon the etheric began to cease. So we heard the sun as the death cosmic being, and one also, though, insofar as the human being could raise himself with his ego beyond the etheric and astral, could enter the sun's sphere. But we also entered the earth sphere. And this is an important part of these whole mysteries, is that through Luciferic means, initiates could hold themselves back from entering in as deeply as their people did into the physical realm, and therefore still bring the messages in what was needed from their gods, a kind of remembrance of their gods. Let's talk about the steps of initiation. First, there would be a long period of study and of preparation, of a purification of the astral body, a kind of catharsis that one would go through, the student. Finally, when this purification had occurred, the exercises would show that the astral was able to imprint something upon the etheric. And now, then the Hierophant knew that the student was ready for initiation. And this meant a lifting of the etheric body out of the physical body. Of course, this is no longer necessary today. These conditions are of olden times. And so the neophyte, once lifted out of the physical body, could now have their etheric body help them to experience the spiritual world and remember the experiences that were really involving their astral body. They would need to be guided by a Hierophant. As we heard, it's a very dangerous journey through this, and hence the whole idea of a guru and so on as one that could guide you. That was necessary in those times. When the neophyte returned, they returned a new person. And so they took on a new name and thus became an initiate themselves. And we see this taking on a new name when a cardinal becomes a pope. And new organs were opened for spiritual perception through this 3.5-day experience. So we had in the olden days, supporting the mystery centers, pyramids built in Egypt. In Greece, we had temples. And in Christian times, we have the cathedral, the Gothic cathedral in particular. And we see this change from seeing how the gods acted to the marriage of the spiritual and the physical, to now a community becoming the body of Christ, where the congregation is joined together inside. In Greek times, the congregation wasn't necessary. One could go there to experience the God. And here it was more for the dead in the pyramids. So I think this is my last slide. This marriage of spirit and matter, a place where the God could dwell. It was the point of these Greek temples. But even their sculpture showed this intent to imprint the spirit on matter. It was an intent to kind of conquer matter without losing the spirit. So in these times, we could say that the Greek was really at this balance, but it was also a time of great tragedy because they felt that they had lost their way. They could no longer go back, and they had no idea how to go forward. But it was a time of Cain coming into his own. So I will take us out of screen share, and I won't talk so long in the future, but we can discuss any of this from tonight or any of the other questions that you might have about ancient mysteries for tonight. And I'm not sure I can answer all of them. I'm not, a Rudolf Steiner here by any means, but so, anyone want to volunteer a thought from that? I'm going to pick on Nathaniel as the youngest I can see. So you've got the most courage to go forward. You have to unmute yourself. Any comments or thoughts or something new?
I've